The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. To many gamers, still considered one of the best games ever made. As the years have passed and the nostalgia goggles have worn, so too has the objective quality of the game. Back in the 90s, I never noticed frame drops or low quality image backgrounds. In fact, the graphics in this time made me jealous of my friend who had this game. This looked like real life to me. Now, there is absolutely nothing about this game that I can say that hasn't already been said before. No take I can give on this game would be truly unique. This game has been picked so far inside out that speedrunners have actually found out how to execute in-game code to skip straight to the end. I want to pay tribute to this game in a way that falls more in the spirit of the current state of the game. It's no longer a perfect, shining example of masterful game design. It is a flawed experience that I think is still beautiful, like a time capsule of nostalgic memories. There are numerous ways to play Ocarina of Time, but I'm going with the original game. I have a camera that shoots Ultra HD, I have a way to upscale the video, but we're doing 480, baby, just like the old days. Zelda is the mark of a huge change for video games. On a smaller scale, though, it marked a pretty big change for the Zelda series as a whole. How were they going to take 2D elements and translate them to 3D? We saw some games in similar genres provide very uncomfortable control styles, and this was obviously not the way they wanted to go. Mario is one example of controls in 3D working well. But one interesting thing they chose to do here to free up more buttons for other game functions was to make jumping automatic, and design areas around that mechanic philosophy. Because 3D is a huge factor, puzzles now implement spatial awareness. They really jumped headfirst into these ideas. Sure, you can nitpick some of these puzzles for being on the easier side, which they are. The block-pushing puzzles are definitely the most egregious, where, it takes more time to, push a block around, and, yeah. It would just be disingenuous to say that the whole thing is a worthless, basic, boring mess, though. Yeah, a lot of the puzzles are simple, easy dopamine hits to the brain, but even with the need to switch out the iron boots from the pause menu, I enjoyed roaming back and forth and trying to figure out what level the water needed to be at, and what parts of the dungeon hadn't been explored yet. Having 4 rooms immediately accessible in the Forest Temple, for example, and trying to figure out where to go, is a big part of it. It's not just the puzzles in those rooms, but it's the temple as a whole, the layout. It's the larger picture that all these smaller puzzles paint. While you go around fighting baddies and solving puzzles, you have to keep a good map in your head to keep track of where to go. With the combo of smaller puzzles, a larger space to keep track of, theming, a fantastic score, you get the biggest thing people keep coming back to this game for. It's immersion. I mean, for Christ's sake, one of the dungeons is literally the innards of a fish. Yeah, the dungeon itself is pretty basic, but I don't know, if you find that environment boring and unoriginal, I don't know what to say.
Watch this.
Now, in Ocarina, the developers made a decision with the text that I do agree is an inferior way to do it. But let's dive a little bit deeper on this one. I think they did it for a reason. The way it works is it's sort of sectioned off into categories. There's important text, which the game does not allow you to skip or speed up, and unimportant text, where you can actually hit B and skip the text entirely. To be honest, I actually miss the feature of skipping the text outright in later Zelda games. This ability is actually an improvement to what they had before, which limited the skipping to one bubble. I really wish they kept with it. The reason I still think it's objectively worse than the standard way of doing text is that the system is kind of set up in a wait for a bit or skip entirely state. If they assign the text skip to the B button and completing a single bubble to A, suddenly it would actually become better than the standard, in my opinion.
Now, I want to ask a question I think is important in setting the critique for these kind of games in the first place.
They aren't shooters. They aren't side-scrolling platformers. They aren't designed with instant gratification in mind, usually. The way this game hits the dopamine centers in your brain is different than something like Mega Man, for example. The goal for how this game is supposed to make you feel is different. So that said, should we really bash it when it doesn't present the fastest possible way of doing something? Maybe if you're a speedrunner, that's important, but that argument is moot when speedrunners can literally inject code to skip to the credits. This game is loaded with puzzles. Do you really solve all puzzles like this?
Solve this puzzle as fast as I can.
We also got treasure chests. Oh my god, the treasure chests!
Yeah, those do kind of take a while. If you're on crack. Come on. Come on.
I think there is a genuine attempt to re-examine something people tend to turn a blind eye to when it comes to flaws. And it does have flaws. It's an older game. I don't want to argue that this game is free from all criticism. My problem is when I'm trying to talk to someone about Ocarina of Time, and some random person comes at me with, "Oh god, Zelda with the slow text scrolling and slow treasure chests. Such a garbage game. I don't know why anyone would play this game. It's like 20 years old, just let it die." Like, a game is objectively bad as a whole because a few elements of the game has dated itself. I believe there's a lot more to this game than that, and personally, I don't rank speed as a high priority in a game about exploration and puzzle solving. One unique aspect of this game is its story. At its core, it really is an age-old story that combines the coming-of-age themes of growing up with the tried-and-true story of overcoming obstacles and working your way to achieve something you were unable to achieve before. Interwoven are the themes of childhood, friendship, love, work ethic, and more importantly, coming into your own. None of these things on their own are unique necessarily, but throw in time travel and tell this story in a video game format so you can experience it with the main character, and I think this actually makes for an emotional, heartfelt experience. It really is an experience, by the way. The time travel part is cool enough. The idea of cause and effect is very important, and the fact that it was managed so well in an early N64 era game is incredible. There's a bit in this game where this man, once carefree and happy when you were a kid, is brooding over the past with this kid that came in and ruined his windmill, playing a song that he proceeds to teach you. From here, you literally go back in time and ruined his day. Oh, speaking of songs, the music in this game is absolutely stellar. If there's one thing that hits my nostalgia buttons more than anything else in the game, it's the music. Just look around YouTube and you can find countless renditions of songs from this game, whether it's orchestral, rock, synth, whatever. Nintendo even rehashes a lot of the melodies from this game because they're utterly timeless. If there's one thing in this game I can't criticize at all, it's the music. Except for the Scarecrow song. Scarecrow song sucks. And that's my fault. Let's bring it back to the story, though. There's a bigger point I want to shine some light on. It comes back to the coming-of-age tale of growing up, childhood and adulthood. As a kid, there's a bit of a carefree atmosphere. That isn't a guarantee, by the way. I understand that many factors play into that, but anyway, if life is fair, childhood is a fond memory. In the game, you are a literal boy. You're a boy. No one takes you seriously. You're not supposed to leave the forest, you can't go past a gate, you start out with a feeling of restriction. And after you leap that first big hurdle, there's this exhilarating feeling of freedom. The world is large, and it's yours for the taking. By contrast, once you pull the Master Sword, you're sealed for 7 years, and what you wake up to is a broken, corrupt, and cruel world. Things aren't as pleasant, sweet, or carefree as you remember them. In Hyrule Town, it's almost like the apocalypse swept through. All the Gorons have been kidnapped, and you need to rescue them. Lake Hylia is dried up. Zora's domain is frozen over. It's all up to you to go around and make things right in the world, and I think it actually speaks volumes to the real-life experience of growing up and carrying out relationships with people. A good childhood is filled with an abundance of free time and feelings of safety. As you grow older, you're given more responsibility and the weight of adulthood becomes more apparent. At first, it can be overwhelming. As you make your way through your life, though, hopefully things start to become more clear. It can be stressful, but you pick up experience. You learn, you gain the ability to manage the stresses that come along with it, and thus, you are put in control of your own destiny. I think this feeling of control and empowerment is even further amplified by the fact that you literally have the ability to complete dungeons out of order. One of my favorite things about this game is a bit of a leftover from A Link to the Past, and the games that come before it. A lot of this map is already open from the start. This game might be linear, but it can be fairly non-linear if you want it to be. Want to work on more than one dungeon at once? What's to stop you? Most of the dungeons aren't locked behind the completion of the one before it. When I was a kid, I was too scared to jump down this hole. But I already had the bombs. I ended up completing Jabba Jabu's belly first. And guess what? The text that plays suggests that they considered this could be the order. They knew people might do this. Once you get the bombs, you can go right over to Zora's domain. My typical run of Ocarina of Time usually looks like this. Deku Tree, Dongo's Cavern, Jabu's Belly, Forest Temple, Fire Temple, Ice Cavern, Water Temple, Bottom of the Well, Shadow Temple, Spirit Temple Kid, Spirit Temple Adult, Hyrule Castle. But for this review, I wanted to see how much I could shake it up, and maybe experience this game in a different way, since I've played it quite a few times. So here's how I did it. Deku Tree, Jabu's Belly, Dongo's Cavern, Ice Cavern, Water Temple, Forest Temple, Spirit Temple Kid, Bottom of the Well, Spirit Temple, Fire Temple, Optional Training Grounds, Shadow Temple, and Hyrule Castle. This is pretty much reflected in how you can complete sections of Ganon's castle in any order. This is the first time I was successfully able to collect the ice arrows, by the way. Nearly 20 years later, and I still hadn't done everything. The biggest reward for me getting this new item was watching Bongo Bongo punch himself to break the ice. I feel like I can relate. One thing I absolutely love about this game is how interconnected everything is. You can find even more elaborate examples of this concept in other games like Banjo-Kazooie, for example, but because there are so many links from different sections of the map, I found myself taking advantage of the shortcuts and mapping in my head what the world looked like while I derped around and crushed a bunch of the collectibles and side quests. As Child Link, it was easy to go from Zora's domain to Lake Hylia on the other side of the map, to play a song for the Scarecrow after grabbing the bottle, then using the Lost Woods to go back over to Dongo's Cavern, which is conveniently right there. As you progress through the game, you get a horse to speed you up. You get songs to warp you around, and you just feel more in control and more on top of the world as you gain items and abilities. I guess a small nitpick here is I just wish they didn't cut off the path from Zora's domain to Lake Hylia. After you defeat the Water Temple, Zora's domain is still frozen over. I think they should have restored it to the way it was before, like the Goron area, for example. It's not like this game is the best execution of an interconnected world, but I believe it had an influence on some games that came after it. And as much as I think Nostalgia Goggles is a bad defense for legitimate in-game problems, Legacy is important to consider how games historically ended up going in the directions they did. I think it should be at least acknowledged. That said, the game obviously has some flaws. Some of them have been harped on a little bit. Obviously the iron boots in the water temple, the text layout, the puzzles where you push blocks slowly. The Poe quest actually ended up being the deciding factor in me choosing not to 100% this game for this review. I've never done that before, but I was well on my way to doing it for this one. Too bad the Poe quest is so goddamn infuriating. Some of the problems aren't even built into the design of this game. I never noticed this as a kid, but on the Nintendo 64, I experienced a number of obvious frame drops and performance issues. I had the game freeze on me in a way I was actually able to replicate multiple times, playing the Scarecrow song in this cage during the Shadow Temple.
Okay, so I shit you not, this glitch happened a second time.
None of these things were apparent back in 1998, but just like the cracks form in our skin as we get older, there are many cracks beginning to show through the original Nintendo 64 classic. That said, it's important to preserve history, and when creating remakes, it's important to keep the original vision that made a project great in the first place. That's why I'm especially happy that Nintendo went and created a reimagined version for the DS. They did right by this game. Nintendo has a weird rep with remakes, but if there's one game they doth be damned if they mess up, it's the legendary Ocarina of Time. Every change they made was an improvement. No more start screen to swap the iron boots. The aiming for the bow was actually improved with motion controls. There's a few nitpicks about atmosphere, and I think they're legit, but it's clear this is a superior version in most other ways. Even better is what they decided to leave intact, where there's every chance Nintendo could have nerfed it. I think making an up-to-date version of this game shows not how dated, but how strong the time-traveling backbone of this old relic really is. While I think being able to look back on old titles critically is important, in my view, Ocarina of Time is still a great title.
If you're into action-adventure games and puzzle solving, I can't recommend this game enough.
Oh, also, it's natural just to walk straight to the Master Sword after this part unfolds, but if you check the back alleys, there's this dying guard that talks of a great war, in a way that's kind of out of line with everything else. I think this is a mistake.